Patrick Findaro, co-founder at Visa Franchise. Today, we're going to be discussing with Jacob Tuimalaga, immigration attorney at ME Visa, how to move to the US on the O-1 visa. Jacob has a lot of experience with all different types of visa categories, including the E2 visa, which a lot of our clients have applied for and continue to apply for. But as we launch our new O-1 visa business manager offering at Visa Franchise, I wanted to bring Jacob on to talk all things O-1 visa. Jacob, thanks for joining.
Patrick, a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
So I think there's a big misconception about the O-1 where people are like, I don't have a Nobel Prize. Like I can't, it's like almost imposter syndrome where it's like, they feel like they're not this absurdly talented individual. Where in reality, I've met people on O-1 visas that aren't so impressive, and I think it's somewhat of an underutilized visa category. So who is the O-1 visa for in practical terms, and who should be considering it?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Without firing shots at the O-1 visa clients I have or have worked with, I would say the O-1A is a lot more available than most people realize. Just to name a few different categories that I've worked with. Dentists, doctors, athletes, business managers, marketing professionals, you name it. It's pretty much open for anyone that I would consider to be pretty accomplished in their career, for lack of a better term. People who've done quite a bit to further their educational or professional career and have done got a lot of evidence to support that.
Okay. So let's go through, some practical examples, because I understand like the salary, it's really based on your circumstances. So like if you're a software engineer in Pakistan and you're getting paid 80K a year, you're probably in the top 2-3% of professionals in your country in that field. Is that something that could be used as a gauge, like where if you're applying from outside the United States, kind of what the where you're positioned in the job market?
Absolutely. O-1 applicants should basically compare themselves to their peers in their home countries. You should not be comparing to yourself in the United States. One other benefit I would say about, if we're talking about salary in general, high salary is one of the potential requirements that applicant for an O-1 visa could satisfy to get approved for an O-1, right? USCIS will even factor in prospective salary, which is pretty different than a lot of other applications where if you have a job offer letter here in the States for a high amount of salary, you can even count that even if you haven't been paid that yet, which is pretty nice.
It's very attractive. So, and I understand it's like basically there are 8 requirements that you have to hit. Well, 8 possible requirements, and you have to hit 3 of those.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a nice little laundry list there, and you've just essentially got to try and check off 3 of them, and then allow them to exercise their discretion in your favor, and you'll get the O-1.
And with your clients, you usually aim for like trying to get 4 in case one of them doesn't move forward, or what's kind of the general strategy with these?
That's a great question. Overall, I try to apply for at least 4 or 5. I would say,
Okay.
honestly, depending on their country of origin as well, sadly, or their country of nationality. This is unfortunate, and I feel bad even saying this, but I would say for certain countries, there seems to be an unfair prejudice where
I've seen that.
you know
We
what I'm
had a
saying?
prospective client from an African country that he's super impressive. Like he's definitely in the top 1% for his field in that country. And he was denied, and they just like poked holes in every, potential item. So I guess with those, certain markets, you have to really be airtight and really make sure you're putting your best foot forward.
Most definitely. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case. I'm sad to say, Patrick. I think your friend there, unfortunately, does not have unique circumstances. So I totally agree. It's best to try and have extra categories. I would say 4 or 5 quality arguments. That way, even if they poke holes in a couple, you at least have some to fall back on. I agree.
Are there any particular nations or regions of the world that you find the process is just kind of easier for the
Oh
O-1 visa?
man.
There's less RFEs or obviously it's hard to fully generalize, but given your volume, your conversations with other immigration attorneys focus on O-1s. What do you see, I guess, in general, adjudicating trends?
I really should pay attention more to what would be considered easier. I think the ones that
Yeah,
are harder seem to stick with you.
sure.
So
That
if
makes
I
sense.
if I had to say, yeah, easier, I will say most recently we've been getting a lot of O's from Canada. I mean, Canada, our neighbors to the north seem to have a good time going through with this. One of the other benefits of Canadian O-1s is you don't even have to get a visa from the consulate. You could just take your approval notice and at the border. That's pretty nice.
So for Canadians,
Yeah,
let's just pause there.
yeah.
So assuming they pay for premium processing, how long usually does it take your firm to prepare the O-1 visa case?
I It could vary. I would say, I mean, the fastest, if everything was in order, it should be about 10 days. If not, it can take a couple of months to get it
Sure.
ready if you're still looking for more evidence. But yeah, I would say if you have everything ready, a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, obviously depending on the type of candidate, and everyone can see, and we'll include a link from the USAS what those 8 criteria are, but it's going to make Jacob's job a lot easier if you come to the consultation. You're like, hey, I qualify for these 4. This is what I think is good supporting evidence, and maybe that would be a case more like 2 to 4 weeks. But for a Canadian national, they pay premium processing. They get an approval in within 2 weeks, assuming no RFE, and they could be here in the United States within 2 months.
Yeah, they're in business 100%. Um, I think just getting back to the requirements that you had mentioned, Patrick, if you had to, a lot of times I have clients who ask me, which one of these should I work on satisfying? Is there anyone that's considered the most important? I think that's kind of hard to say, but in my opinion, if you're going to work on one, I would say that creation of original contributions of major significance would be one of the most important things that you could work on. Um, if you could show you've produced something that's substantial and you have peers or colleagues or other industry experts who can comment on the significance of your work, you've got a really good shot, of satisfying additional criteria there as well. So that's what I would say is one of the prime ones to focus on.
Jacob, could you give like a practical example of that? Like what would be the profile of the candidate and what was their original contribution?
Yeah, I would say so for O-1s. I don't know how this ends up being the case, but my firm seems to have worked a lot with influencers and YouTubers and
Okay.
other. Yeah,
Nice
kind of a
niche.
cool little thing. Yeah, I enjoy getting to watch the content. I guess as a part as a part of it. So for let's say media influencers, pointing to your creation of your channel and the feedback that you have either in the press or from other content creators commenting on the the reach of your content. That's one important thing. Now a lot of us aren't content creators. I'm definitely not. But I would say even if let's say you're a
Not
business
yet.
manager, not yet, not yeah, not over here. But let's say you're like a business manager, but you were critical. You're an important cog in your company, but you've produced some work product, let's say manuals or materials, or let's say you've even signed on as like a contributor on a patent or something. You can still count that as a part of an original contribution of
Hmm.
major significance. So yeah, there's a lot of. It's going to be case specific, but um, you just have to take a close look at somebody's background and what's something you're most proud of in your career, and that's where I would start looking at in answering that question.
And are there any age limits? Like, could someone in their 20s or 30s get an O-1 visa?
Yeah, absolutely. The youngest person I've ever done this for, it was 21 for
Okay.
an O1. Yeah, they were, for lack of a better term, they were a baller. So I think eh, you there's no age limit for what you can accomplish. Certainly.
Okay, that's good to know. And what other limitations does the O-1 visa have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say one of the biggest limitations. A lot of people who are familiar with this visa seem to think that it can be self-petitioned. You because it's so close to the EB-1A green card process, right? The
That's right.
requirements are substantially similar. Technically, you cannot. However, um, you can have ownership or even own a company or entity that sponsors you for the O1. And so in that case, even if it's a technicality, you just need to have a company to file the application for you. I would say that's one important limitation, besides the limits on time, time validity, and required evidence you need to gather.
So we've seen that a lot with startup executives where you have a US based startup, there's a board and effectively the company's sponsoring you, but you could be fired in your position. And does that usually suffice for the O1?
Yes, I think that's the safest way to set it up because it looks like it's a bona fide job offer. Now, I have had one person personally who owned 100% of their own company, who did file this and signed their company support letter and forms by themselves. So it's technically possible, but I would say it's certainly safer to go with the route that you had suggested, Patrick.
So you have the sponsor. It could be a large company where it could be Amazon sponsoring. Or I've seen also a lot of H-1B holders at some of these companies, or they're on an L-1 and they can't freely switch get the O-1 visa at a small, midsize, or large company. So it could be a startup that you work at. It could be a larger company. And then what we've been formulating at Visa franchise is this business manager option where we're going through the first few cases and we're opening up a wait list. But maybe Jacob, you could dive in a little bit on the business manager and how that kind of fits a void in the marketplace.
Absolutely. So one of the nice parts about the O1 that I think is different from, let's say, the L or the H-1B, which are super common too. You're not limited to it being a professional occupation, right? Or to really any specific field. So you can fill in as long as it's in your area of extraordinary ability. You can fill it. And so, like you had mentioned, Patrick, there is a substantial opening for. I'd say there's a substantial vacuum in the market for this business manager's role, where um, you basically need somebody with extensive experience in their specific field to help grow and scale operations and help improve the efficiency of your organization. Um, and I think that O is a great path to that because you're also not limited by the caps that you are for the H or have to have worked for the specific sponsor like you do for the L. So I think that's why the O is so nice, to be able to
And
do that.
what I like about us as a business manager role, we manage the LinkedIn, the GitHub, basically the social media presence, dealing with recruiters, one-off projects, and kind of how everything's evolving. It's a great way for a prospective employer to test out the talent, where it could be a project-based assignment of 1 month, 3 months that maybe turns into a permanent, full-time job, and then the O-1 beneficiary still has the optionality to continue with side projects or maybe work on their startup where if they're on an L-1 H-1B, they're really stuck to that job and they shouldn't be, opening a startup and fundraising for their own business venture.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, I really love that you've designed this just because I'd say this is a really creative lane that hasn't really existed. Like, in my years of working in immigration law, I haven't seen, especially, in the early 2000, early 2010s, you just didn't see companies having to do this because there weren't as many immigration restrictions. I feel like, and with the growth in our country and growth in immigration, people have to get creative in reaching their in achieving their business goals. Through immigration.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like 20 years back where people stayed at the same company for 5, 10, 15 years. You can just look at LinkedIn profiles, whether they're American or immigrants, they're bouncing around. And I have many friends that in a 6-year period, they've been at 3 startups. So if every time you're asking the new startup, like, hey, I need sponsorship, can you help me with this? And you're trying to sell yourself every time beyond trying to just sell yourself as a worker. It's definitely it can be a point of resistance. And we've seen it with H-1B workers where they'll start at the same salary as their American peers, but after 4 or 5 years on the H-1B, sadly, those that are able to float around and switch in and out of the labor market, and they're not, you know, t- connected to the employer with the visa, oftentimes they're not getting the same salary increases and bumps as O-1 visa holders or Americans that don't have that visa tied to the employer.
Right, absolutely. It's amazing what having leverage can do
Yeah.
for you here. I think more than anything else, this is what if I'm a born American, but I feel like if um, I was a foreign national here looking for employment opportunities, I would really, without having a green card, I really would try for this visa, just for the flexibility's sake, if nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah, Visa franchise, we're all about taking, control, as much power in your own hands as possible and not being beholden to an employer, whether it's for the E2 visa category, EB5 with your own business project and not relying on someone else unnecessarily. Let's talk about the validity period because I know it varies a bit country by country. And in terms of like some countries, it's a 3-year visa, they can go back and forth. Other ones, it's less. How long? Tell me a little bit, I guess, about the visa validity. What's going to be in the passport, and then the status. How long someone can legally stay in the United States?
Yeah, that's one of the most frustrating parts of immigration, I feel like, is the disconnect between the Department of State, which deals with immigration outside the US, and then US Citizenship Immigration Services, which is here in the States, right? I really wish they would have, some uniformity there, but alas, they do not. As far as the validity periods, you're exactly right, Patrick. Normally, the maximum period for an O-1 that you can get is for 3 years. So if you're filing an O-1 application, you're going to file something called an I-129, and on that form, you're going to mark the maximum for the first time O-1, I should mention. You should list that you want the validity period to be 3 years. Now, if you apply for something called a change of status, basically to just change from whatever status you have to an O here in the States, um, you can get that processed in 15 days if you do the premium processing. And you can basically start working immediately, assuming you have your social and all that fun stuff. But if you want to process, you need to travel internationally. You may, depending on the country you're going to, you may not get the actual full 3 years in your O-1 visa. I would say one of the most common ones uh, that's not 3 years is Mexico. Like even if you're, let's say, I want to say it's only 2 years in Mexico, and your derivatives, like your spouse and children, only get 1 year. So that's just one of the downsides of consular processing sometimes.
And I guess one of the negatives on the O-1 when you compare it to some other visa categories like the E2 or the L-1 is that the spouse can't work, right? They don't have a work authorization.
Yeah, I would say, if you, from an objective standpoint, if I was evaluating, Congress's decisions with that, I would say that's kind of a weird oversight, personally. You know,
And yeah,
um,
so hopefully it's something that can be changed. But I guess the bigger hope would be you get the O-1 and then you start the green card process. How do you usually see the O-1 candidates? Do they transition to EB2 NIW? Do they go for EB1A? What's kind of the general path or options for those that get the O-1 visa and then get the green card after?
yeah, that's always the question that comes up. I There's a lot of different schools of thought here. I'll just give you my personal opinion. Whenever I recommend anything to my clients, I like to recommend them to go for usually the one they're most statistically likely to go for. But obviously, a lot of times there's other. I mean, they're likely to be approved for. Obviously, there's a lot of other interests you have to account for, such as time or maintaining status. Most of the time, I will tell people to go for the NIW because at the very least, we were just talking about the likelihood of approval for an NIW for this
It's
quarter was like,
high.
yeah, it's high, right?
Q3
So
was 89%, prior quarters 86, 84. So comparing that to the EB1A, I don't have the latest stats, but last time I checked, it was like 72%, 75%. So it definitely
Yeah,
seems like it's scrutinized at a higher level. And then the competition pool, I guess, going for the EV1A also is quite high.
yeah, yeah. For exactly those reasons, I usually tend to go with EB2. Now, a lot of clients don't like that. Like the processing time for the EB2 is a turn off. Unfortunately, I get it, and so they want to go for the EB1. This is purely my opinion. It's strictly anecdotal, but I feel like if you immediately go for EB1 after an O1 approval, USCIS tends to hate that
Okay.
because it seems like, again,
Yeah.
this is strictly my opinion. It seems to me that there's some sort of arbitrary uh, line that they have where they want to see that you have even more evidence beyond what you had submitted at your O, right?
I've heard
And
it is a lot harder. Just because the requirements pretty much look the same doesn't mean they're going to adjudicate it the same way.
right. I think that's some like I get it as far as the discretionary, there's a discretionary element to EB1 where even if you meet three of those requirements, they could say that on it doesn't look like you meet something called a Kazarian standard, where you're not in the very top echelon. I can understand that. What's frustrating to me is when they say, "Yeah, you were featured in publications in major media yesterday, and today those are no longer publications in major media." That seems crazy,
Even though
but
like
it does happen.
viewership's grown like 20% for those media
Right.
sources.
Right. Yeah. So that's just one of the frustrating realities
If
that
money's
comes
not
up.
an issue, does it make sense to try for both the EB1A and then also EB2 and AW?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you've won, you've had some good winnings in Vegas and you have some extra to spend, yeah, try
Yeah.
both of those for sure.
And then let's talk about especially our friends that were born in China or India that might not get the EB2 for like 20 plus years, EB1, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years. These categories are really backlogged for Indian nationals as well as Chinese, especially for the EB2, at least 4 or 5 years. What's the dual intent nature, of the O1? If they already are waiting for their EB2 and if they're already waiting for their employer based green card, does it make sense to switch to an O1 as like kind of a stopgap? What do you see for those folks wherever in the world? It could be a Brazilian that got approved for the EB2 and it's been, it looks like it's going to be 2 years and they want to move here sooner, or they're already here and they might get out of status.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, for our Chinese and Indian national friends, we're sorry for the delays that you have to face. But if you are looking for a non-immigrant visa, let's say you're waiting abroad and you do want to come here sooner, the O1 an attractive option for a lot of reasons. One of them, I think, like you had mentioned, Patrick, it does allow for dual intent. If you look in it's something called the Foreign Affairs Manual. It's basically the rule book that the consular officers have to go by. They expressly state that an O1, unlike most non-immigrant visa uh, applicants, the O1 does not require applicants to maintain a residence abroad. So you don't have to show that you're likely to come back, right? You can have a pending green card application and still get an O1, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, the O1 for me just makes so much sense to the US government, especially for those like people that are already working for US firms where the firm's not paying payroll tax. And
Right.
the second the O1 visa candidate moves to the US and continues working at that firm or another US company, taxes go up 6% on their pay. And it's like, it's an extra 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, whatever amount. Just having that person here in the United States, as well as income tax and all other types of taxes. So, from what I see, it's a no brainer for USAS to have these people here. And how do you see it with that AI initiative? Do you think it'll be easier for those data scientists, those developers that are working on AI to maybe come through the O1 visa?
Absolutely. I was pretty happy to see that. So, I guess for anybody watching here, it comes from an executive order. Is that what it was from the Biden administration, where they basically expressly state by name, like they mentioned the O1 by name as a visa that they want to incentivize, for lack of a better term, to help address this AI issue, right? To help build their AI infrastructure here. So I definitely think this is something that will help. So if you're a data scientist, anybody who works related to AI, I think that I would include as much evidence of your subject matter expertise in this area as applies.
And I mean, for so many companies, whether the developer works in or even a product manager is working in insurance, working at a big bank, they're using machine learning models. There's usually some level of AI. So it doesn't have to be you as the founder of this well-funded AI startup. Look at what you're doing and what you're going to be doing, and see how your job is impacted by AI, and how you're leveraging that technology and building upon that technology and feedback. And hopefully we can, working with Jacob, build that into the case.
Absolutely. And then from there too, it will help set you up. Like if you're applying for an EB2 or an EB1, but I'd say particularly for an EB2, uh, adding in that evidence would help strengthen your case. Improve your chances of approval as well.
And what do you see? I mean, I know it's hard to predict, but do you see the EB2 category, like right now, I think it's like backlog 10 months. Do you see that going to 18 months, 2 years?
Oh man, it hurts to say. I really don't want to be a doomer
Yeah.
by commenting here, but unfortunately, I do think that we're going to see additional regression here, just based on the numbers of applicants that we've seen in fiscal
Every
year
quarter, I mean, there's
2023.
like 8,000 approvals just for the NIW category, and that's not inclusive of everyone getting the EB2, where years back, NIW maybe 1,000 approvals in a
Yeah,
quarter. So it's really just shot up.
it's it's basically unprecedented. Whenever I have calls or questions about, hey, how much longer do you think this is going to take? I'm like, I've never seen this wait time for this category for it. Just has never happened.
So I know the focus of today's live streams on the O-1 visa, but any other options for those that are kind of stuck waiting for the green card, whether in the United States or overseas, for like a stopgap?
If I were overseas or in the US and you were looking for something to bridge your status, most of the time, I think clients look for options to give them work authorization, probably number one, and then number two would be travel authorization. If that's the case, you need to try and target non-immigrant visas that allow you to work here in the US, right? But also protect for you to have dual intent. So in
Yes.
that case, I would look for the H, an L, or an O visa, or I mean a P, but it doesn't really come up very often. Um, that's what I would personally look for, just because it's really stressful to have a non-immigrant visa that doesn't allow for dual intent and to try and enter the US that way. You might get lucky. I've seen a lot of people do that, but it's an unnecessary stress that I would try and avoid.
Yeah. We've had a lot of visa franchise clients get the E2 visa and enter the US successfully while they have like a pending I-526 for EB5 or relative sponsoring. And especially, it's not an issue if it's like a relative sponsoring and they're going to get the green card in 12 years
Right.
and they're getting the E2 visa for 5 years and they're coming and going and they're going to leave the US after that 5 year period. But I think it's tough if you're gonna expected to get the green card in 6 months. Like it's a tough situation that needs to be handled with care, and ideally you're on one of the other visa categories in that situation.
Right. God willing, that is the case. I will say, just as a quick caveat for anybody who's presently here in the US, you might be able to, I use might, I'll emphasize the word might there, be able to apply for an EAD if you're on a certain other non immigrant status, if you're on in certain E visas or HLOs. Um, you can apply for an EAD even if you just have your approved I-140, if you haven't been able to file your I-45 yet, but you have to show some exceptional circumstances for why you need that, compelling circumstances why you would need that. I know a lot of times that can be helpful though.
And do you see that like with the Indian nationals? Like if they're on an H4, the spouse has a H1B, and it's like, hey, I need to work. It's going to be like 20 years for me to get the green card.
Yeah, I would say for that reason, if you are an Indian or Chinese applicant, and you have the option between H or O, you really might, if you're married anyway, you really might like to stay with H
Yeah.
because your spouse can get an EAD with an approved I-140, right? That's a big plus for
There's a
sure.
precedent. Basically, they're giving
Yeah,
it to everyone that's on H. Yeah.
exactly. That's really nice, actually.
Yeah, no, that's a great point to bring up, and it's crazy how immigration is really a moving target, and then it's not the passport you have, it's where you were actually born. And if you're on the wrong side of a border, you could, get a green card in 20 years, or if you're on the right side of the border, less than a year, for the same
It
case.
it's crazy. It's crazy trying to explain to people, the arbitrariness of a lot of our regulations. A lot of times when they ask why, I'm just like, I really can't say. I just know here's the rule we have to follow, unfortunately.
Jacob, we had a lot of questions come through, but we actually, went through all of them. I think maybe just one we can do a refresher. Nico's asking, can I sponsor myself for the O-1 visa?
Hi, Nico. Potentially, yes. I think this is something that Patrick and I were discussing earlier in the stream. Well, potentially, yes, with a caveat that you could own a company that could sponsor you for an O-1, right? And you could talk about the specifics, um, with an immigration attorney or with a qualified team, but you could do that if you have the requisite ownership of a company, legal company here in the U.S.
Jacob, any concluding thoughts for those that are looking to move to the United States, or change status to the O-1 visa?
Um, oh, thank you so much for your time. I guess the only my parting words for this would be if you think that you're a slam dunk candidate for the O-1, don't wait. You can go ahead and move forward with that. That's great. But if you're not quite there yet, I would reach out to Patrick, reach out to somebody at Visa Franchise, um, or to any another qualified immigration professional, and talk about your case with them. You can set steps. You could take action now to build your profile to get there.
Yeah.
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint for this. So those are the things that I would do.
Yeah, very well said. And I think you said it right, earlier in the live stream, where there are some cases where it's going to be 2 weeks, and the other ones where it's going to be 2 years, because you got to really build that case. And you might, like, especially some countries, really skilled, really high paid people don't want to be public because of security reasons. So building their public persona and the evidence is going to take more time. So Visa franchise by your side. We can act as your business manager, connect you with potential parties to help support the application, whether it's associations that join, PR agencies to get the press that needs to really show and that your skill, and put that in the public space. And we'll be sure to check out in the description. We have links to our solution. We have a quiz for the O-1 visa to see if you're eligible now, or if there are items for you to work on. And then Jacob, I guess if someone wants to contact you and evaluate your case, is there an email, or should they visit your website? What's the best way to connect?
Yeah, either way, you can visit us at usmevisa.com, or feel free to email me at jacob@usmevisa.com. Happy to point you at the right direction if
Perfect.
you have any
Yeah, because
questions.
we're just a business manager at the time. There's not so much value we're adding for those that are going the startup path. But if you are
Gotcha.
looking to open up have your US startup sponsor yourself, that's something that Jacob's done many times over. And if you're looking for more of a business manager to help you
Mhm.
on your endeavor in the United States, you can contact us at Visa Franchise.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, everybody. Patrick, appreciate it, brother.
Thanks, Jacob. Take care.